new cartoon that I've came across when it comes to their unique style along with the originality. I can say that Summer Camp Island, with it being 3 years old, I consider this mostly a underrated cartoon, but not an underrated cartoon from the likes of Elliot from Earth, which I'm gonna get to later on this month, spoilers, and Craig of the Creek. But considering that this is the first video to begin Summerpalooza 3, which is gonna be a month full of reviews, I decided to review this ahead of time, mainly the fact that this episode alone, despite being a really good episode, it's still mostly a quiet introduction for what Summerpalooza 3 is mainly about. And the episode I'm going to be reviewing from my very first review from Summer Camp Island is Moon Problems. The episode begins with Oscar talking to the moon, and the moon shows his friendship bracelet, but Oscar forgot his friendship bracelet, which mostly depresses the moon to the point that he ends up quitting his job as the moon as part of Summer Camp Island. And because of the moon going away, most of the spots in Summer Camp Island, mainly the beach, using beach water, along with the wolf not being able to make his wolfing sound in the sky, which is basically the logic of what Summer Camp Island is. And then we get Susie, who's having her hair being messed up because the moon isn't around. And it's all because of Oscar's ignorance that causes the moon to get a new job instead of doing his own job of taking care of Summer Camp Island. For how much that this show is mainly about education towards children along with animals and also objects with faces on them, this world building of Summer Camp Island is a lot more shallow, but at the same time, it's in a way, well, it doesn't need to be taken seriously. I mean, compared to other shows like Craig of the Creek and Steven Universe, and maybe Rebel Bells, they sometimes take some plots some seriously when it comes to characters being in predicaments while also going against each other. And while there are moments that some of the characters go against each other, this episode is mainly about a friend going away because of the ignorance from a certain friend that they are close to because of the friendship bracelet. Let me just say, the moon in this episode, I honestly found him a lot more odd to be in an emotional state, but Summer Camp Island is just like the equivalent of Blue's Clues with every character having a face. But this isn't really toned down to toddlers. This is mostly for 6 to 11-year-olds. But at the same time, for what this show does when it comes to its characters, even with the characters who have faces off of other objects, I still think that this episode is still one of my favorites so far from Summer Camp Island. And I'm still at the first season. For one thing, with this taking place on an island with so many creatures getting along, and this is at a time where they just don't know what else to do on Summer Camp Island other than just hanging out and also doing other activities in the meantime, along with Susie being the council. This episode, along with the entire show, is basically a perfect representation of how normalized this show is. I mean, in Adventure Time, it isn't normalized when it comes to its world building. Regular show is close to normalization, but so is The Amazing World of Gumball. But shows like Steven Universe and especially Teen Titans Go, which I can guarantee you that no one will normalize superheroes for being out of character compared to the original, they just probably have similar ideals for how they can make their worlds a lot more unique as long as they have the differences between normalization and taking this entire world a bit seriously. And for me, this episode is a combination of normalization but also seriousness, where you completely see the moon not doing his job because Oscar forgot his bracelet. And let me just say that Oscar and Hedgehog in this show aren't really that memorable, but at the same time, they're not forgettable. Since they're portrayed as normal children, and they're not wizards like Susie along with her friends in this show, which, if you can debate that if she does have a friends by this point of this show, then I consider that these two characters are basically the symbolization of what children are in the real world. Granted, children will probably be thrilled to go to an island about summer camp, but on the other hand, with this mainly towards animals and not humans, the world building in the show is a lot more bizarre compared to other cartoons when it comes to their world building, like We Build Bears, for example. And it's mostly of how the pacing is executed with the effects going on at one time. Mainly after Oscar and Hedgehog succeeded their goal to get the moon back to doing his old job, a huge waterfall occurs, and people are just normalize it to the point that it's Summer Camp Island and not something that you would usually see on Planet Earth. I'm pretty sure that this episode alone actually shows onto why Summer Camp Island is a show for being its own thing and actually gets some kind of recognition from other people, from other fan bases. Because with this show releasing almost half of the episodes of the first season in one day, I'm not making this up, this all happened 3 years ago, and the fact that the next batch of episodes didn't occur until the next 11 months, this show is somewhat mistreated from Cartoon Network, but at the same time, during this time, Cartoon Network are airing a marathon of Adventure Time episodes because the finale ends up arriving in the next 2 months. Not to mention other cartoons like Teen Titans Go, We Bear Bears, and during this time, Steven Universe was on hiatus until the end of 2018. This show was still new at the time in 2018, and just seeing this along with Adventure Time that ends up ending in the end of its run on Cartoon Network, mainly the finale premiering, I'm going to assume that this show was at a time while it's with other cartoons that easily made this show mostly forgettable. And this was 2 years before HBO Max became a thing. I would talk about the other characters, but whenever I get back to the show, it will have to be at a time where this show actually caught my interest, and this around the time of Summerpalooza, while I review multiple cartoons in 1 month, I might consider that this month is mostly appropriate for Summer Camp Island episodes. But just to point this out, I am gonna get back to the show eventually, just not anytime soon. But just like every other show that I've been talking about over the last 5 years since I've been on YouTube. But here's something that I actually enjoy from this episode, and this show in general. It kind of reminds me of how Cartoon Network is like after doing one of the most popular shows, and after the shows came to an end, all we get is some of this along with Quake of the Creek, and the characters who are trying to accomplish their goals in these types of episodes are still really good to sit through, especially of how much that Oscar wants the moon to get his old job back. And all I can say, Oscar in this show, even though that Hedgehog and Susie get some kind of spotlight in further episodes later on, even though that he's mostly a generic child who just wants to enjoy the camp for his own benefit when it comes to most of the other activities, especially with his friendship with Hedgehog, he is still somewhat of a tolerable character regardless. Then again, this show, even though if it does have some kind of development when it comes to other characters, mainly Susie in the 3rd season, since that she is 400 years old, but with him along with Hedgehog getting limited development from this show, I'm pretty sure that the purpose of going through some situations involving the world building of Summer Camp Island is probably what makes this show mostly memorable for. Because all I can say is that their interactions with objects along with other characters that they're getting the knowing by time, I still think that that's probably why these two characters are probably the best bits in this entire show. And it's mostly of how the moon is feeling in this. And when he sings his song of how much that he wants some kind of attention, but not the attention when it comes to Susie, it shows that other characters with a face on it can still leave an impression regardless. This is like Blue's Clues, but unlike Blue's Clues, which is way more educational, what this episode does when it comes to educational is to not go a little too far and have the world building of Summer Camp Island a lot more different compared to other world buildings from other cartoons. And to give this episode credit, the animation is just like Adventure Time, with most of the characters, mainly the objects, having eye dots, kind of like Finn, PB, Marceline. And the movement from the animation is honestly a little bit more similar to what Adventure Time was. I guess it really shows that of how this show is. I'm pretty sure that some of the animators are from Adventure Time, since that Adventure Time was history once it came to an end 2 months after this episode. For me personally, this episode does a lot more when it comes to normalization while also taking the situation seriously. I think that with a combination of those two being present in a show like this, I actually admire what Summer Camp Island does for a change. Of how the ending is when Oscar sings a song towards the moon, which ends up having him gain a bracelet, along with the moon gaining a new bracelet, is probably well I appreciate what this show does for its characters. Even though that this cartoon is still from the 2010s decade, I can say for an extent that in this decade, this show can still leave a good impression when it comes to newcomers who are getting into the cartoon community of this decade. Granted, it doesn't compare to what the 2010s did for animation, but again, we're still in the beginning of this decade. With 1 year down, along with halfway into this year, this decade is going to be a lot more when it comes to surprises. And if there's anything that HBO Max can offer when it comes to children, they can definitely watch this, but I'm pretty sure that HBO Max streaming service is mostly for teenagers and adults, so I don't understand of how children are going to watch this unless if their parents allow them to watch this on HBO Max. This is a good way to start off Summerpalooza 3, hasn't it? And the good thing is, we still have 29 videos to be uploaded to culminate Summerpalooza 3, so get ready for a long ride. I give this episode a 7.5 out of 10.
Let's get this started!